Saudi airstrikes continuing to pound Yemen as battles in these streets shake the capital yet again. But concerns over a face-off between the Iranian and American navies fading, at least for now, as Iranian warships turn away from the Arabian Gulf. With me now, Robert Jordan. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia under President George W. Bush and the diplomat in residence at Southern Methodist University. Ambassador, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, Maria. Hi.
A lot of conflicting reports about Yemen this morning. I want to get to that in a moment. But let me kick it off with the breaking news of the day in Nepal. A horrible story there. More than 2,000 people dead after the worst earthquake in 80 years. How would the State Department go about this in terms of getting aid to such a remote place?
Well, we have access to our military personnel who are very, very helpful in situations like this. It's really an opportunity for America to make friends by aiding in a time of terrible necessity. This reminds me of the tsunami aid that we provided some years ago. This is a terrible tragedy, but it's one where we can actually make a difference. America is very good at mobilizing and dispatching aid. We'll obviously have many challenges because of the terrain in Nepal, but this is something that our military, with State Department guidance, are very much up to.
Of course, the U.S. has already mobilized to assist Saudi Arabia in its Saudi-led airstrikes in Yemen, and Iran is fighting against the Saudis. What can you tell us in terms of what's happening there, given the fact that earlier in the weekend we thought that the airstrikes were over, only to see more fire overnight?
Well, the Saudis were very clear that the airstrikes were over as long as the Houthis did not try to advance their positions. The Houthis ignored the ceasefire, went into additional areas, and so the Saudis have had to come in to try to stop those advances and degrade them. This will continue if the Houthis don't lay down their arms, if they don't heed the call for peace talks. My guess is, though, those discussions are occurring somewhat under the radar, and at some point here we'll see the Houthis and the government of Yemen, probably also with Saudi and perhaps even Iranian involvement on the sidelines.
Ambassador, a lot to talk about with you on this issue. I certainly want to get your take on the Iranian ships suspected of carrying arms to those Houthi rebels. Stay with us, please, Ambassador, because first we want to take a look at this extreme vigilance. Deterrence or a little bit of both? What exactly does the U.S. and Iranian naval presence in the Arabian Sea mean going forward? Fox News correspondent Eric Shawn with that. Good morning to you, Eric.
Good morning, Maria, and good morning, everyone. It had the makings of a major confrontation with Iran, but the Iranian Navy apparently hightailed it in reverse as a U.S. aircraft battle carrier group loomed on the horizon.
I think there was a lot of misreporting. I saw a lot of cable tickers today, ships going there to intercept Iranian ships. That is blatantly untrue.
Well, whatever it was, it worked. The United States Navy showed up, the USS Roosevelt aircraft carrier, the guided missile cruiser, the Normandy, and shadowed that Iranian convoy suspected of being dispatched to resupply the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. The 9-ship Iranian convoy, consisting of 7 freighters and 2 Iranian frigates, did a 180, heading towards home, we are told, instead of delivering its suspected cargo of rockets, missiles, and mines intended for the Houthis. It came as Saudi Arabia announced it was somewhat partially scaling back some of those airstrikes, a move observers suspect gave Iran a possible excuse to back down and open the way for Iranian President Hassan Rouhani to call for a ceasefire, even if some question his sincerity now that his Houthi allies have taken over most of Yemen.
We hope that everybody comes to their senses, and we hope that Iran's proposal is realized. It is for an immediate ceasefire. We believe that this is a solution that can resolve Yemen's predicament.
There is an opportunity for us to try to effect a legitimate political transition in Yemen.
Well, it turns out that political transition may end up helping the Houthis and their patrons in Tehran. You know, despite the Saudi airstrikes, the Houthis remain firmly entrenched, which is what their Iranian allies had always intended. And as for the USS Roosevelt, well, it is also leaving, heading back to the Persian Gulf to resume launching its airstrikes against another threat, and that of ISIS. Maria?
All right, Eric, thanks very much. Dangerous things happening in the world. More now with Ambassador Jordan. And Ambassador, what do you think about that? I mean, why do you see this actually deepening when we thought it was actually coming to an end?
This is really not unusual, Maria. Often in situations where you're on the verge of having peace talks, both of the combatants will try to capture additional territory in a last-minute flurry of activity. That may be what's going on here. But in any event, the Saudis, I think, are going to have to be very careful. They're going to alienate much of the Yemeni population by airstrikes that continue to pound civilians and raise enormous civilian casualties. There needs to be a relief effort organized here, which I think the Saudis are in the process of doing, and it needs to reach out to the people. But they also need to try to give credit to President Hadi, who is now in exile in Riyadh, for any progress that is made. I think Hadi's equity has been damaged somewhat by his fleeing the country at a time of crisis, even though that's probably something he had to do. But he needs to be rehabilitated in a way so that he can get credit for relief efforts and for leading at least this contingent of his country in the peace talks. This is not going to be easy, but let's remember the Houthis are probably 35% of Yemen's population and really can't be ignored at this stage.
Really interesting analysis there, Ambassador. What should the U.S.'s role be at this point?
We need to be supportive, but we need to be in the background. The last thing we need to be is the primary actor in a local dispute, essentially, even though it's being fought through proxies. The Saudis, for many years, have had relations with Yemen through the tribes. They need to work those relationships and perhaps even are speaking with Iran on the margins and under the radar. But this is something that we need to keep a light hand on, and I think we should really be encouraging the Saudis at strong relief efforts and ways to try to reach a political solution. We haven't yet seen from the Saudis what their vision of a political solution would be, and I think this is next.
Meanwhile, despite the strikes and the ground fight, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is making more ground in southern Yemen. Is it fair to say that the rebels are dominating in this part of the world?
I think it's fair to say right now we're seeing the collapse of many of the state systems that have been created, and we're seeing non-state actors now rising even more violently than they have in the past. This is a situation of chaos, and it's one that requires a great deal of patience, but also some firmness in dealing with many of these rebels who are filling these vacuums.
Well, how often does this come up in the so-called nuclear talks about a framework between the U.S. and 5 superpowers and Iran? If Iran is spreading terrorism in this part of the world, in Yemen, how are we talking with them in a friendly manner and believing that they, in fact, would consider stopping the enrichment of uranium toward a nuclear bomb?
This is where the trust but verify breaks down. I think you have to mistrust and then verify. And the enforcement mechanism is really key here. Because these are bad actors, because we can't trust them, we have to have an airtight enforcement regime. We so far haven't seen that, of course. It's not clear how effective it can be. It's not clear how effective our coalition will hold together once sanctions are lifted. So I think this is a very difficult hurdle that we're going to have to follow very closely and insist on a very robust, firm, and essentially airtight enforcement regime.
Right.
And I'm not sure we're going to see that.
Ambassador, good to have you on the program today. Thanks so much for your insights.
Sure. Thanks, Maria.